Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to everyone who's coming on. Welcome to all of my replayer viewers. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to turn my camera around so I can talk with you guys. Hello. If this is your first time with me, my name is Keely. Hold on, I have to get my camera set up. My name is Keely, and I am the owner of LoveHopeAdventure.com. I blog about the marriage relationship, intimacy in marriage, and sometimes some lifestyle posts and just general, things, parenting and things. So that's why I wanted to actually come on today and talk with you about talking with your kids about sex. So when do you start this process? How do you start this process? There are so many questions surrounding how to have these very important conversations with your kids. So to a degree, you kind of have to sit back and think about, okay, how did my parents do it? And what did they do that was positive or negative in talking to me about sex? And I am always shocked at the number of adults that tell me their parents never had a conversation with them about sex. They just left it up to sex education at the schools or whatever. I'm not even really sure at what point. Yeah, see, a lot of people say that. Over there at Redeeming Home, she says her parents didn't talk to her about sex. And my husband's parents didn't really talk to him about sex either. But I'm going to tell you something. My parents did. And my parents, I think, really got this right. They didn't have one conversation with us about sex. They had an ongoing conversation with me and my brothers about sex over the course of our lives, even on up until the time I was married. My mom still checked in with me about my sex life after I got married. She was like, this is so important, and I don't want you to think it's dirty. I don't want you to think that sex isn't something you should enjoy. I want you to be positive about it, and I want you to know what it is and feel comfortable asking me your questions. And so so that's good. At least your mom said don't have sex until you get married. And my parents taught me the same thing. My mom and dad wanted me to know what the Bible has to say about sex. And so I learned at a very early age, we started this conversation. So I think that this has been very helpful for me. The way my parents approached it is this the approach that we're taking with our children. First of all, when they are young, we name their body parts. We don't call them things they're not. We just tell them what it is. So for our boys, they have a penis, and we tell them that's what it is. And we have labeled body parts on them. This is your penis. This is your butt. Just like any other part of their body. And when they were younger, we did not explain to them that these were sexual organs, but we just, as kids, we started telling them what these things were. We didn't want to misname it so that one day they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know this was called a penis. Or if somebody even started talking about it, they would have no idea what they were saying. Then I've got a 10-year-old, 9-year-old, and 5-year-old. And so for our 10-year-old, we, in the past couple of months, have started talking with him about sex. And what is sex? And what happens? And what occurs? Even though he's young, he needs to know this, and I'll tell you why. He has people that are in his class that know about sex already. I know it's young, but they know about sex at this time, whether it's because of the internet, they've got older siblings, whatever. And I tell you something, I want to get to my kids first. As much as I can. I want to get to them first before they start getting all this outside influence. And we have explained to him that sex is something God gave us. It's for marriage, and it is a way that babies are born. So my 2 older kids remember me being pregnant with Braden, and they would ask me, okay, so how did Braden get in there? How did he get in your stomach? And I would tell them, and I would say, guys, there is a way this happens between a man and a woman, between the mommy and daddy. And the man gives the woman something that helps her to get pregnant, but I didn't explain fully to them what that was because they were very little. I didn't make stuff up. I didn't tell them the stork brought them or something ridiculous. I didn't ignore their questions, but I did tell them But there are some parts of this that you're just too young to understand, and so I'm not going to tell you about it all right now. But you need to know that I will one day. And so we are starting that conversation with them. I think that the earlier you start it, the better. I mean, obviously not too early. Don't go all into it about everything too early. But by the time they're 9 years old, they are old enough, in my opinion, especially given the fact that so many kids have access to the internet now. I was taught about sex when I was 9. I started my period very early, and my mom felt that it wasn't fair to talk to me about me having a period and not explaining to me what sex was, and so I kind of did get hit with all of that at one time. But my mom was like, I have to talk to her about this. She's going to want to know why she's got to bleed every single month. So here's the rest of it. And we started that conversation very early on. I always felt comfortable going to my parents, asking them about stuff because we just always talked about sex. It was not an off-limits topic. And that's what I hope to do for my own children. That's what I encourage you to do for your children. And I'm going to tell you guys, here's the thing about talking about sex. If you don't feel comfortable talking about sex with your husband, then what are the chances you're going to feel comfortable talking about sex with your kids? You have to start that conversation with your spouse. You have to start the conversation with your husband first, all right? Start talking about it. Start getting, really start talking with each other about sex. It's a taboo topic with your mom. Well, look, you may not ever be able to talk to your parents about sex, and that's okay. But I hope that you will stop that trend with your children. Because listen, guys, people are going to talk to your kids about sex. You cannot shelter them from this. You cannot protect them from this. They are going to see it. They're going to read about it. They're going to be curious about it. And why shouldn't they be? Why shouldn't they be curious about sex and what it feels like and what it's like and when should you do it and when shouldn't you do it and all of the things that surround this super complicated subject. Obviously, guys, it's complicated because there are married people out there that struggle with it. There are grown people out there that are struggling in their sex life. They come into the marriage with tons of baggage or come into the marriage with a lot of poor understanding of what sex is. And some of that is due to the fact that they didn't have anybody tell them about it. So they just learned about it in sex education or on the bus or wherever. And there is so much information accessible to our children now. If you let your child be on Instagram, they are going to see porn right away. Okay, there is so much of that underage stuff going on Instagram. If they have phones and they're texting, then you have to tell them, it is not okay to take pictures of yourself naked. It is not okay to send pictures of yourself to your friends that are naked. I already think my kids, have friends who have cell phones. I have no idea what their parents have or haven't done on those cell phones. How do I know what my kids are looking at on someone else's screen, even though they don't have a cell phone? So we have to have these conversations, be so intentional with them instead of just leaving it to chance. Don't do that to your kids, especially if that was done to you. It's not fair to them. It's not healthy for them. And really, you're not setting them up for a successful marriage because you're allowing their sex education to be given to them by whoever has their ear. And you don't want that, believe me. So these conversations are not easy to have, but you need to start having them. So if you and your spouse don't regularly talk about sex, I encourage you to start there. Start having these conversations with your spouse. If you feel really blushed, like you get really blushy every time you talk about sex or things like that, you have got to get better at it. So have those conversations. Just start having them. If you've got a close friend that you can talk to about sex, do that. Now, I'm not saying go in there and start saying, well, my husband likes to do this to me and my husband likes to do that to me. Advice on preschoolers saying booby in public. Well, it's the same thing you would tell them. Please don't say poop in public. That's really rude. This is something that we, that just it comes across as rude. Yes, everyone poops. There's nothing wrong with pooping, but we're not going to talk about that in public because it's rude. Women have boobs, and we can talk about that, but these are some conversations that we shouldn't be saying to everyone in the world. Not to say that the words are wrong or that the conversations can't happen, but there are some conversations that we don't have with everybody else in the world. And that's kind of how I've always handled things with my kids. I just tell them, hey, there's nothing wrong with saying this stuff or talking about this stuff in an appropriate way. But, well, your kids like to say you have big boobs in public. Nice. Well, I would just tell them that's rude. That's rude. We don't talk about the way someone else looks. We just don't. I mean, it would be, if you would tell them it was rude for them to talk about your body at all in public. And it's okay to have those conversations, but even those conversations should probably be limited because, I mean, it's just rude. Because my kids as preschoolers would be like, that person's really fat. That's rude. We don't say that. That is an observation that you can make, but we're not going to say that. All right, we're not going to say that out loud because it can hurt their feelings. You can hurt mommy's feelings by talking about how big my boobs are in public. That is, that's just not something we're going to say so that others can hear us. And like I said, don't tell them the words are bad. Don't tell them it's bad to ever talk about it. But there's just a time and place for everything. And so we don't allow certain conversations at our dinner table. We don't let our kids talk about, like I have all boys, all right? So there's plenty of poop humor in my house. And we don't let them carry on like that at the table. And their dad actually doesn't let them carry on around me with that stuff because I'm a woman and I don't want to talk about those things. So what the men do when I'm not around, my husband and the kids, but my husband is teaching my boys that there are some things that are not appropriate to be talked about around ladies. And Putin and things like that, that is not okay around your mom and others. And if you do, you need to say, excuse me. And there is certain conversations we don't have at the dinner table. We don't talk about anything that's gross. We don't talk about morbid things. Those conversations are okay to have, but just not in that context. And so the same thing with talking about your boobs. There is a context in which you can have the conversation, but out in public isn't one of them. That's kind of how we've handled it, even when they were very little. There are some conversations that we just don't have in this situation or that situation, and it requires a whole lot of talking to them again and again. Hey guys, remember we said this wasn't appropriate at this time, or this isn't good dinner conversation, or whatever. So we have a lot of conversations like that. With talking to your children about sex, again, you have to start by being comfortable saying the words. If you refer to all of your body parts as some name that you've given them, then you have to start talking about it. You can't be like, well, that's your hoo-ha. All right, that's great online because if I put vagina up there in my URL, it's going to get flagged, right? But in real conversations, when we're really talking about this stuff, we have to be allowed to, we have to be able to say that. So you have all girls under 5, yes, and that you should tell them what their body parts are. Now, as far as telling them the body parts on a boy, you might want to wait until they're a little bit older than 5. You might want to wait until you have that conversation about sex when they're like 8 and 9 and stuff. My kids have asked me a long time, well, what makes guys and girls different? I mean, obviously it's not just your hair. You look different than I do. And when they were very little, I did not name my body parts for them. But now that they're older and they're starting to learn about sex, I do. Because I want them to know what it is. They didn't have little sisters